starting. So the question I'm asking everybody is, what draws artists to Miami for Art Basel, and what they hope to accomplish by coming down?
That is a very interesting question you would ask.
Yes.
Particularly in the context of the fact that there is so much press about Art Basel, and it all, for the most part, revolves around this incredibly kind of wealthy, highfalutin art scene that happens here.
Yeah.
But what I am most interested in, why I've continued to come back year after year to Art Basel, is because it's an incredibly fertile place for artists, and it's an opportunity for artists to really see what else is going on in kind of like a pretty broad way.
Yeah.
And it gives us an opportunity to see each other and talk about the work that we've seen and talk about what we're going to make next, which is the most exciting thing for me, which I think is a little bit lost, at least in the way that a fair like this is kind of talked about in the media.
Okay. Yeah, I think so too. I mean, it's interesting that you talk about it like a place where artists can come and compare notes. It's something I haven't heard as much. It's more like people are thinking about like what the market's doing, and that's part of it. I think the background of what you're saying.
Well, maybe it's because coming from New York, I think I have a pretty good idea of what the market's doing, and it's not necessarily new work that I'm seeing. I mean, this is what we're seeing in Chelsea, on a regular basis, particularly after, coming from the fall in New York. It's like the biggest time for shows, and we see a lot of really amazing stuff, and we kind of know what's going on, but it's a lot more about, for me, about being down here and seeing the other artists who are down here, who in some ways are, kind of giving more to their work by being here in some ways. It's like you have to invest in yourself if you're not lucky enough to be down here represented by a gallery who's you're on their dime or whatever.
Yeah.
Then if you come down here because you really care, then it's an opportunity to both show what you're doing and also to really see what else is going on.
So, what is different about comparing notes here and comparing notes in New York then? Because, like you're saying, you're seeing a lot of the same work in some respects.
Well, it's just this very condensed kind of. We all know that we're here to compare notes in some ways. It's very different from those times where we're just kind of like going to galleries every once in a while and seeing stuff and talking about stuff. It's like all of a sudden everybody's seeing a million things at once, and we all have a chance to say, well, this is what the market, we're talking about the market again, but, this is what the market is doing, and this is how we kind of relate to this pseudo kind of related entity, which is not pseudo-related at all. It's actually intrinsically related, but it's something that's mildly separate from the art-making process.
Okay. What can you expand on that a little bit?
Let's see. How can I expand on that? I mean, we do our own thing as artists. We make our own work, and then we, decide what we want to show, and we see what other people are showing, and, particularly when we're down in a place like this, when we're emerging artists, and we're, still trying to find our gallery and trying to find our place in the art world, we're kind of seeing what the market is responding to.
Okay.
And so we can then say, how do we fit into this picture?
Over the last couple of years, because you've come down at least 3 years, what have you seen in terms of like what your ability has been to relate to what the market's taken an interest in? In other words, like what has...
Well, that's an ever expanding and contracting question as an artist.
Right.
I think.
Right.
And
some successes, and ups and downs in it. Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, you can see what the market's doing and respond to it directly, and that can be usually successful, and or for a lot of artists, they can feel mildly offended by what the market's doing and how it relates to their work, and they can, kind of respond in that way, But it's all in the sake of art making.
Yeah.
Because as artists, we can't not do what we do. We can't not make work, and we can kind of, there's a spectrum between totally not market viable to very viable, at least whatever it is in our own minds, and we can try to kind of exist on that continuum in some ways.
Well, what I find kind of interesting about all of what you're saying is that I always think of wanting to become an artist as something that's not a career track in any way, et cetera. And yet what Basel tries to present, and I think to some degree, is this kind of sense of convention, right?
Yeah, it's like the big, the big.
It's the kind of trade convention for artists.
It's like a trade fair.
Yeah.
And we try to pretend that it's not about the market. We try to pretend that it's not about kind of that idea, but it really is, and we can't really survive without it.
I don't know if that's a good or bad thing. I mean, I'm kind of curious how you read it, how you track that.
Well, I wish it wasn't that way. I wish I could just make work and not have to worry about what the market was concerned about. But of course, just like any other field that, one may find themselves in, we have to be concerned about how to.
Why does it bother you, actually?
Well, it bothers me because the art making process is so individual and so in some ways private. As an artist, we make work and then we kind of share it for the world, but it's like we're bearing our soul, and it sounds so kind of like, it sounds cheesy to say that, but it's really true. We make work because we have to, and the work we make is so incredibly important to who we are as people, and kind of intrinsic to our nature, and then we have to try to sell it, which is
or find somebody to sell it for you, I guess. What's your take on how galleries I always think about it like there have been shows like this in different forms, like the Venice Biennale, for instance. Galleries are involved in that, even though it's not so commercially upfront. What's different is that this is, it's very defined by finance these days, and that seems a different thing, and I'm not sure how artists view that or how they interact with that.
We were talking about this earlier today. The idea of patronage. And it's been that way actually it's been that way forever. Artists ever since before the Renaissance have always relied on patrons to be making artwork a viable
pursuit.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, or just whether it's fortunate or not, that's just the way it is. You know what I mean? Just like any other part of our capitalistic society. We have.
Well, do you think it empowers or disempowers, or is irrelevant to artists and what they do?
I think it really depends on the artist, and I think that in some ways it relates to the idea of the professional versus the hobbyist.
Okay.
Those who make work for just purely the sake of their soul and their need to make it, and they don't care what anybody thinks about it because they just need to make their work, versus people who make their work for the same reasons, but they also understand that if they want to do it professionally, then there has to be some sort of thesis behind it that gives it some sort of meaning.
So like the calling versus the profession, in a sense.
Potentially.
Do you think that I would take what you're saying, for instance, to mean that a lot of people who are showing at the kind of higher end are more professional artists and therefore not following so much a calling, and maybe they're A
Well,
plus
they're
B
still
equals
following,
then.
yeah, but they're following the calling to its necessary end.
Yeah.
You know, because in some
Okay.
ways, like I envy the hobbyists. I wish that I could make work and not like care about why I was making it or what, you know, whether it was going to sell or anything. But it's important to me because I don't want to do anything else that
Yeah.
I can make work that will actually sell, and that comes into the equation, unfortunately.
One of my favorite poets, Selah Milos, wrote that artists envy normal people, which I think is kind of an interesting problem.
Yeah, and then somebody like Freud, although I don't think it was Freud, said that artists, you know, have access to a part of the kind of psychological experience that most people don't have, and we are both blessed and cursed with that, you know, and we have to kind of contend with those demons and kind of see what we want to do with them.
And I always find that kind of interesting about the market and the art market in particular. Is like, here are all these kind of people who don't fit into society, you know, based on kind of conventional standards or whatever, hanging around with people who are the definition of conventional standards. You know, and I don't know if that's interesting or useful or, but it happens in the art market.
It very much does, and the people with those conventional standards are so thrilled to, you know, kind of have this experience with.
I like that idea. I hope that the kind of financial vehicle thing that's happened with things like Basel haven't lowered the standard of how those two groups of people.
I mean, it doesn't diminish the power of art, you know, in and of itself, and the kind of whole experience of seeing something and having a reaction to it, you know, which is just kind of the most visceral and basic reason why we.
Right, except that it's defined by this context of the market now, right? And that's the question. It's like, how is our interaction being mediated or mitigated or whatever by that context of how we're understanding how we relate to each other?
Very, very confusing.
Yeah, it's very confusing.
Yes.
I think that's a great wrap right there.